Hi, my name is Maria. Welcome to my channel MH Books on. Filmed on a Saturday, called a Friday reads, probably not uploaded this Sunday. I've lost a day. I have rhinovirus, which means I have a cold. But rhinovirus can be stopped spreading using the same methods as coronavirus, so that's useful. I'm easy on myself. I can hear this cold on my voice, and just chat about the three books I read this week that I enjoyed, which is basically what a Friday reads. That's why I'm still going to call it Friday reads, because I like the term Friday reads, puts less pressure on me. Before I start though, I did say I would open this at the end. So it's All Forms of Love, Colombia, historical classic, magical realism and mesmerizing. I so know what this book is. This is my fifth book from Blind Book with a Date, which was a Christmas present. And I think I'm going to get six. I think there's six. And the other four I already had on the shelf, three which even had exactly the same copy. But this one I don't have. I know what it is. I just know what it is. Because I picked it up so many bloody times. So I was due to get it soon. So very good selection, lads. They're nicely packaged too, but we'll see if I'm right. Okay, I'll tell you what my guess is as I open it. Okay, but if somebody else wants to guess, so it's All Forms of Love, Colombia, historical classic, magical realism and mesmerizing, and budgies are in the background. This week I finished three of the books that I actually mentioned last week. So because I read so many books at the same time. I finished Stephen King's Wastelands, which is the third book in the Dark Tower series. I did not like the first book. I consider the second book, Journey of the Three, and the Wastelands more or less the same book. The two books together would be slightly under 800 pages. I consider the next book in the series, book 4, is 800 odd pages. The next one is 900 pages. It is actually, the length of one of the books, and more or less it is part of the same story. The Dark Tower series is based on a lot of things. It's an homage in a way to a lot of things that Stephen King used to like to read. It is based on a land that has moved on. This land obviously has just had a couple that just had 1,000 years or so ago, a long time ago, has had a nuclear war, and things have been destroyed in the nuclear war, but also magical things are sort of happening, and that distances have changed and time doesn't seem to be in the normal rules. There are portals from our world, from different time periods in our world to there, and there's three characters from our world by the time we get to the Wastelands, okay? Series, and we have a gunslinger who actually belongs to this land. So that's hopefully enough background. I'm not saying any more than that because I think that's spoiler territory. All I want to do really is talk about what I like in this book. I did not like the first book. I like, and I consider the Journey of the Three and the Wastelands more or less the same book. We're at the stage of something like Lord of the Rings. I was trying to explain. Stephen King bases a lot on epic fantasy like Lord of the Rings. We're at the stage of the quest bit of the journey where all the heroes have to get together and they have to go. And as is common in Stephen King books, this is a bunch of people that society would normally reject, with the exception of the gunslinger, who's a hero in his own universe, but is not really part of this cat-a-tet, this group of people. And this is what I like about Stephen King. He does this quite a few times. He puts what is then saying even when you just watch the movies in it, the Losers Club, the people, in that case it's kids, together, who normally society kind of rejects and doesn't put together. And this is what's a real pleasure in reading these kind of fantasy stories or horror stories when Stephen King is writing them sometimes. And I would think of things like they do the similar thing like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where they put all they call themselves the Scooby Gang, but people who would have been rejected more or less, or in say the Angel, the spin-off series Angel, people would be rejected. Joss Whedon likes to do this a lot too, because it also exists in Firefly. So there you go. There's loads of TV references. And I said, what is it about these loser gang, these people who are accepted amongst themselves as friends for the very reason that society kind of rejects them? And I just think that it's a comfort for most people to think that all the things that you don't like about yourself, or people have said haven't liked about you. So it could just be that you're the introvert, in my case, who didn't speak a lot in school. So therefore, I must be thinking bad things about people, or whatever it is that they said that they didn't like. And the fact that a reader would be accepted amongst this group. So obviously readers are going to be attracted to these kind of stories. I just think that this is a great story device that appears in a lot of literature, that just makes that gives people the fantasy. The other thing that I actually just thinking now, Notting Hill has it too. So there you go. There's a rom-com. I will watch rom-coms. I don't really read them. Where he has this group of friends, like the failed restaurateur, you know, a group of friends that are eclectic together, and it's just one of the things I really like, and that's one of the things I've really enjoyed in these two books of the series. There's obviously lots of other bits in the story itself, which I won't talk about, because very hard when you go to a long series and there's spoiler territories. Plus, and you know, I'm trying to guess the whole story arc of 7 books, and you know, what if I guess it right and I'm actually spoiling accidentally? The next book I read is a little bit more towards the literary end, and that herself has won a couple of tiny awards, I think, for literary fiction. So I did finish Wolf Hall. I'm about halfway through Bringing Up the Bodies. Yeah, just slightly up halfway. I will only talk about Wolf Hall for the time being. So what is it that made me give Wolf Hall 5 stars yet again on its reread? I took much longer to read it this time than last time. I read it at the same time of year, about 2 years ago, which is amazing. And I read it much quicker last time. I wasn't in as much rush now to get to the conclusion, because I knew what it was. In this book, it is Hilary Mantel's depiction of Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, that I like so much. Well, especially in this reading. So it starts with the arrest of Wolsey, Colonel Wolsey, and it kind of more or less ends in the it's historical event, so it's not spoiling. Death of Thomas Mann. Hold on just a second. Sorry, budgie alert. And also, I said Thomas Mann when I meant Thomas More. Thomas Mann is the German novelist. Anyway, so and it ends with the death of Thomas More for refusing to sign the pledge that Henry VIII is the head of the church in England, because he's a devout Catholic. But both of these two men, one is basically, Wolsey is basically Cromwell's father, so he appears all the way through the book in memory, and Thomas More, who is basically his opponent in most things, kind of almost define Cromwell. There's so many Thomases in this book. So like, which one? so define Cromwell, and he feels quite differently to both of them being devout Catholics, and as you find out through the book from Cromwell's reading, at first, he is definitely a Protestant at the time of the Reformation, is definitely questioning, and for good reason. He has good experience of it. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't feel for, that Wolsey is almost like his father. And it doesn't actually make him as good a man sometimes, because normally Thomas More he's a little bit too right-wing for most people's tastes, a little bit too devout, and a little bit harsh on his wife, to say it mildly, but is actually kinder in one scene about Cromwell's son, where Cromwell says, I'd rather my son die than you not sign this and die, to More. So many Thomases. And and Thomas More, who has been pretty, pretty dickheaded, you know what I mean, about sticking to this, thing, says, wait a minute, like, Gregory's a really good lad, don't say something like that. So you see, like, Cromwell's character is never perfect, it's always flawed in this. And you see his rise from a beaten blacksmith's son to, by the end of the novel, the second most powerful man in England. It gets interesting here because his power is predicated on the king, which is what this one's about. But you see his rise from that. You see the complication of being an educated man, educated in many languages, being basically a merchant banker, in a world of courtiers who think that they're above you, but you actually knowing more about how the world works than they do. He takes the clothes off people's backs and prices them. Then he dresses a peasant woman in the finest silks to see how she would look in his own imagination. He dreams of food and his descriptions, and he gives food as presents. He admires the political wrangling of Anne Boleyn after her being dismissed by his mentor, Wolsey originally, realises how she is wrangled and how she's manipulating the men around her. And there's real admiration for Anne Boleyn in this. He progresses in character by the time you get to bringing up the bodies. And we have all this complicated character, which makes this book fascinating as a reread for a second time, and makes me happy that I'm not rushing out to get Mirror in the Light. I'm not. I will. I'm 97 now on the waiting list, because somebody dropped out. They haven't actually physically gotten the bookshelf in the library, and they've only ordered 5. But that's not true, because last time they did this to me, they actually ended up getting like 30 books in the end when they realised the waiting list was big. So I have hope, but yeah, but I'm not rushing out. I will be doing is reading, finishing the Bringing Up the Bodies, looking at the BBC adaptation, which does those 2 books. And reading another book which I have to pick up from the library, so I have to finish this filming soon. Excellent. So the third book I read this week, which I really enjoyed, and the reason I enjoyed it was such a surprise, such a pleasant surprise, and I find it really hard to define. And that is, I'm going to have to look up the book. How? A Storm Warning, Beth Doyle. Now, I have that wrong. It's there on the screen. So I didn't have to look that up. It is a fantasy story. Now, it's hard for me to categorize. This is the problem. This is why it's such a surprise. The narrative took me places I wasn't really expecting. I would call it young adult in themes. It is written by Beth Doyle and Ms. Doyle while she's between the ages of 16 and 18. So she's definitely a young adult writing it. Her characters are 17 to 19-ish. So and yes, it has a lot of the themes and relationships that Beth would know about. So she writes about what she knows. So there's a lot of those themes. The writing style, though, is not young adult. It is full of imagery, a lot of commas, similes. I'm going to do a proper review of this, which will include a couple of quotes from the book, or you can find my Goodreads review. I'm hoping to write it tonight or soon. I have Grumpy Old Man sitting tonight, so I'll write it as soon as I can. And it also has this wicked, the writing also has this wicked sense of humor that is a very Irish sense of humor, where we kind of always think the worst of ourselves. Self-deprecating humor, I suppose. So it'd be interesting to see how that translates to people from other countries, where they get, I think they do, they get the self-deprecating hero. This is basically a fantasy story where a young girl is pulled into a magical world. The magical world is not the same as Harry Potter's world, but there are similar rules in that the magical world exists at the same time as this one does. What happened was, a time in the past, the worlds got separated because of a war. Okay, I don't want to tell you too much, because this is actually part of the intrigue of the book, almost at the beginning, what exactly pulled the two worlds apart. She's accidentally pulled into the world, and as per usual, she is the prophesized destructor of the world, but the prophesized destructor may also be the hero. This is a normal trope that we find in all these books, but she handles her story very well. We have bits of sort of like Jodie Taylor, like Jodie Taylor does the St. Mary series where they go back and forth in time. I think it is. I hope I got that right. So they go back in time at one stage, because they have to go back in time to this place before where the two worlds separated. So she goes back to a point in history where the two things are together. It ends on a cliffhanger. Knew that was happening about 100 pages before the end, because I could tell her pacing was good, and I went, you're not 100 pages on the end of this story, hon. You're ending this. So I'm guessing this is going to be a trilogy, because most things are, but who knows. It's definitely got another book coming. And one of the other things I found about her is she's a very good way of describing place. She describes Dublin, because a couple of the scenes are fought in Dublin, because the two worlds exist, and some are in the magical world, because there's areas within the planet that are, I don't want to give it away, it's not hugely spoilerish, but within the planet, which, you know, the magical world still exists. It's just that we can't get there and can't see it. So a lot of that happens in Dublin. She describes Dublin extremely well. I could actually see the places. I went actually last night and filmed before coming home, because it's right beside work. One of the places in George's Street Arcade where they have a running scene and they run to somewhere. And she described it so well. I filmed it and exactly as she's described it, except the names have been changed to protect the guilty. So yes, so she was a surprising new writer who will be an auto-buy. I will actually buy. I got her book as a Kindle edition for review, so it was free for a review, but I think it's only like 99p on Amazon on Kindle anyway. I will be buying it. She will become an auto-buy to see the next installments. I'm a sucker for places I lived or live in, so I'm a sucker because of her descriptions of Dublin, and I really, really, really enjoyed her. I'm going to cut this off now because it's getting too long, so let's do the opening of the book. I do love the way they're packaged. The budgies love the string. This string is absolutely their favourite string, so can't wait for the book. This is probably why they're yelling at me today, because I haven't opened this. It's just been sitting here. And All Forms of Love, Columbia, historical classic, magical realism and mesmerising, has to be Death. Was it Love in the Time of Cholera? Death in the Time of Cholera. Oh, Lord above us. I have it right. Love in the Time of Cholera. Until next time, why don't you just, I hope you enjoy what you're reading. Tell me what you like about what you're reading this week as well in the comments below, if that's what you feel like doing. Always comment whatever you feel like, or don't comment if you don't feel like. That's grand. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what kind of books and why you like certain books, and why you think you liked the book you read this week, because I think it changes week to week, and I think there can be and from read to read as well, you know, that you can, that the reasons that you like something just, you know, are not always even obvious to yourself. I just find it interesting because, you know, one of the reasons you like something might be the reason I like something, and I never actually fully realized it myself. Okay, that's just going off on a tangent. So thanks for watching and enjoy what you're reading. Bye now.